Good evening to everyone joining us from Israel, and good afternoon to our viewers in the United States. It is a great honor to introduce the inaugural Adam and Bernard Cherik Memorial Lecture at Bar-Ilan University. This annual lecture series was generously endowed by Jordan and Lorraine Cherik of St. Louis, Missouri, together with their daughter Rachel. Adam Cherik, of blessed memory, passed away on the 1st of Tevet 1988, shortly before birth. Though his life was brief, his thought left a lasting impact, drawing his family closer to God and inspiring acts of remembrance in his name. Bernard Cherik, born in Dublin in 1940 and later a distinguished figure in Israel, made Aliyah in 1947. A gifted orator and committed Zionist, he served as senior vice president of the Hebrew University from 1948 until his death in 1988. He is remembered for his intellect, leadership, and deep contributions to the Jewish people and the state of Israel. Jordan Cherik, a graduate of Yeshiva University and Boston University Law School, is a long-life attorney and student of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, Zichrono Livracha. Lorraine Cherik, a Yale alumna and executive of CSI Leasing, and Rachel Cherik, a Bernard and Washington University graduate, continued the family's legacy of leadership and commitment to Jewish values. Jordan Cherik has expressed that the family chose Bar-Ilan University for this lecture series because of its excellence in Jewish studies and its embodiment of Rabbi Soloveitchik's vision of integrating Torah and secular knowledge. Tonight's speaker, Professor Elie Assis, is a renowned scholar in biblical studies and former dean of the Faculty of Jewish Studies at Bar-Ilan. His research has made significant contributions to the study of biblical narrative and prophecy. This event is being broadcast on YouTube and Facebook. If you have any questions or comments, please send them through the live chat and I will pass it to Professor Assis. Professor Assis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Avioz, and thank you all for making an effort to come on a Thursday evening to this lecture. And we hope we will be able to contribute a little bit to the understanding of justice in Tanakh, in the Bible. More than words, living out biblical justice. The story of the people of Israel begins in the book of Genesis with the narrative of Abraham. However, the account of Abraham emerges against rather surprising backdrop. The story of the flood concludes in an unexpected manner. God destroyed the world because humanity had corrupted its ways, suggesting that a new and improved world order would now commence. Yet, the narrative of Noach ends with a striking declaration by God. ויאמר אדוני אל ליבו להוסיף לקלל עוד את האדמה בעבור האדם כי יצר לב האדם רע מנעוריו ולהוסיף עוד להכות את כל חי כאשר עשיתי. Rather than expressing hope for a reformed world, the text conveys sobering concession. The divine expectation of moral transformation is abandoned. God acknowledges the persistent nature of human evil and consequently renounces the strategy of destruction, recognizing its futility. From this point forward, God embarks on a new path in his relationship with the world. No longer does God address all of humanity directly. Instead, he chooses to work through a particular lineage, a select seed from within humankind. The mantle of responsibility now shifts to the people of Israel. They are called to walk in the ways of the Lord and embody his values in the world. through them, a new model of moral and spiritual life is to emerge. At the center of this vision stands Abraham. He is not merely the founder of a nation, but the channel through which blessing flows to all humanity, as Scripture declares, "V'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpechot ha'adama." This marks a turning point in biblical narrative, from universal failure to a focused mission entrusted to one man, and through him to an entire people. Given the sequence of failure, Adam and Eve, the sin of Cain, the flood, the behavior of humanity in the Tower of Babel narrative, one might expect the text to explain why God chose Abraham. Yet Abraham's story begins not with an explanation of divine choice, but with a command and promise. ויאמר אדוני אל אברהם, לך לך מארצך וממולדתך מבית אביך, אל הארץ אשר אראך, ואעשך לגוי גדול ואברכך ואגדלה שמך ואהיה ברכה. ואברך מברכך ומקללך אור, ונברכו בך כל משפחות האדמה. Despite the grand mission and central role that God assigns to Abraham, the narrative provides no rationale for this election. Unlike the story of Noah, which begins with the statement, Noah was a righteous man, the story of Abraham offers no description of his character or any reason for his selection as the father of a chosen people. At this juncture, it is only natural that the midrashic interpretation enters the discussion, filling the narrative gap with the well-known story, familiar to every child, about Abraham destroying his father's idols. In this account, Abraham cleverly persuades idol worshippers that their objects of worship are nothing than vanity. According to the Midrash, Abraham's merit lies in the discovery of one true God within the world steeped in idolatry. However, what the Midrash contributes is compellingly and entirely absent from the biblical text itself, and this omission is striking and demands explanation. Some commentators suggest that Abraham's merit lies in his immediate obedience to God's command. Rabbinic tradition and others view God's call to Abraham as a test of faith. These explanations uncover the merit of Abraham once he was chosen, but do not explain why God chose Abraham in the first place. It seems that the biblical narrative deliberately refrains from providing any rationale for Abraham's election. This narrative silence may serve to emphasize a theological point, that God's choice of Abraham is absolute and unconditional. Were the text to attach a specific reason to Abraham's selection, it would imply that the divine covenant is conditional upon a particular merit. Consequently, should such a merit be absent in future generations, the divine choice of Abraham's descendants could be called into question. An explanation of the choice of Abraham is given later in the biblical narrative of Bereshit in chapter 18, verses 17-18, in the story of the announcements of God's intention to destroy Sodom and Amorah. Prior to the destruction of the cities, God says, "ואדוני אמר המחסה אני מאברהם אשר אני עושה, ואברהם יהיה לגוי גדול ועצום ונברכו בו כל גויי הארץ, כי ידעתיו למען אשר יצווה את בניו ואת ביתו אחריו, ושמרו דרך אדוני לעשות צדקה ומשפט, למען הביא אדוני על אברהם את אשר דיבר עליו." Only at this point does the Torah inform the reader that Abraham was chosen because he was foreseen that he would command his household and his descendants to go in the way of righteousness and justice. Scholars agree that the expression tzedakah or mishpat means to be kind and show mercy. Abraham is the father of the nation, and the reason he was chosen as such was to ensure that the values of righteousness and justice will prevail in the world. How different is this explanation from the Midrashic one? The first explicit expression of the idea of justice and righteousness appears in a very interesting way in the narrative. The continuation of the story can give us an additional insight into the role of humans in promoting righteousness and justice. God informs Abraham that his intention to destroy Sodom and Amorah on the account of their wickedness. At this point, we are told that Abraham approaches God and tries to see whether there are any righteous people in the city for whom it could be saved. He asks if there are 50 righteous people in the city, then 45, then 40, then 30, then 20, then 10. To each of these pleas, God says that he would save the city were there that many righteous men in it. But since there are not, he is not ready to save it. The dialogue ends with there not being 10 righteous people in the city, and so it will not be saved. It can be discerned that there is a full agreement between Abraham and God. Both agree that the corrupt city should be saved on the account of good people in it. Both agree that there are no righteous people in the city and that the city is totally wicked, and therefore the fate is destruction. This whole dialogue creates a seizable dilemma. First, why should God seek to share the divine plans with Abraham? What is the point of recounting their dialogue? It is clear that this dialogue neither advances the story nor leads to any development in it. The absence of influence of Abraham on God stands out in contradiction to other biblical stories in which a man of God brings about a change in God's opinion, especially Moses. It would seem that the dialogue is recounted in order to teach us something of God's expectations of Abraham. God ascribes Abraham greatness in his being the father of the chosen people, through whom humankind will be blessed, to his doing righteousness and justice. The placing of Abraham against God in his exchange is to illustrate Abraham's tendency to be righteous and to do justice. However, the Torah did not choose a story with a positive outcome, while depicting Abraham's trait to pursue justice. In my opinion, the Torah sought to show Abraham's inner inclinations, and they in fact stand out when he is unable to achieve his goal and effect radical change. To stand on the side of justice against injustice is an obvious stance. Here, Scripture does not seek to present Abraham's way of thinking, but rather his inner inclinations. Abraham is a man who always seeks justice, even when the situation seems hopeless. Abraham's stance against God is an attempt to find some justification to save the wicked city. Stems from a feeling of justice, which is an internal attribute deeply rooted in Abraham's personality, and not an external intellectually acquired outlook. In this way, we can understand Abraham bargaining with God. When he asks if there are 50 righteous people in the city for whom the city could be saved, it is clear that he started with a relatively small number he thinks justifies the saving of the city. This claim is reinforced when the text number he suggests is 45. He actually says, perhaps to make up these 50 righteous men, just 5 are missing. Will you destroy the whole city on the account of just 5 missing men? It is clear that at this stage, Abraham remains of the opinion that 50 is the number of righteous required to save the city. But he now tries to cut the corner. Now he gradually goes down to 10 people. In the text, 4 stages of dialogue. Here it is clear that Abraham is reducing the standard that he himself set up in the beginning. This fact comes again to teach about Abraham's inner inclinations. While he thinks that in principle the city should be saved if it has 50 righteous residents, nevertheless, his feeling of compassion brings him to moderate this number down to 10. But this is only part of the story. For while indeed Abraham is shown here to be a person of great mercy and humanity, he gives up in the end and does not go to ask, what if there are less than 10 good people in the city? And he does not suggest saving the city even if there are no righteous people at all. The reason for this is that Abraham seeks not only compassion, kindness, and mercy, but also justice. His first complaint against God is, חלילה לך מעשות כדבר הזה להמית צדיק עם רשע, והיה חצדיק כרשע. חלילה לך, השופט כל הארץ לא יעשה משפט. Abraham's concern is that God will do justice. Therefore, when it becomes clear to him that there is not 10 good people in the city, and on the principle of justice, the city must be condemned, he does not continue with his pleas to God. Abraham does not seek to give up the principle of justice. When he understands that the city does not contain any righteous of whom its fate might be reserved, he accepts God's decision that the city of Sodom needs to be punished, and so the principle of justice will be upheld. I am not concerned now with the question why number 10 and not another number, but rather why he stopped at all. Why, in Crenshaw's words, he stopped pushing the deity to the limit. But this claim stems from the seeing of Abraham in the perspective of righteousness, while this story presents Abraham also in the perspective of the principle of justice. And under this principle, the wicked must be punished. This episode presents Abraham as someone who holds two values, righteousness and mercy on the one hand, but justice on the other. In Abraham's overall attitude, these two values are apparent. The value of kindness and mercy in his calls on God to attempt to persuade him to save the city, and the value of justice in his desisting to persuade God and his acceptance of God's decision that Sodom needs to be punished. Ultimately, Abraham does not have a real effect on the divine decision, but God does involve him in his decision-making to some extent. God tells Abraham about his plans in order to evoke his response, but Abraham has no effect on God's decision. God expects Abraham to be involved, to care, to act upon it, even if there's no shift in the outcome. The significance of the story is that humans must not stand on the sidelines and they must not let things simply happen. God invites humankind to plan an active and decisive role in establishing the rule of righteousness and justice in the world. The message of the story is that even when chances of changing or influencing things are very small, one should still not stand on the sidelines. Humans' role is to exhaust all the possibilities available to ensure that the rule of loving kindness. Therefore, the Bible sought to illustrate Abraham's tendencies to justice and chesed through the story in which he has nothing to gain, in which he does not change anything, and in which, nevertheless, God expects him to be active in society. This principle expressed here is true within human relationships, but also valid where divine justice is concerned. In this field, too, God invites Abraham to be his active partner. The concept of justice stands as a foundational principle in the biblical narrative. And it is central both to the divine election of Abraham, the patriarch of Israelite nation, and to the selection of Moses as the nation's leader and formative figure. Remarkably, Moses only begins his public role as leader at the age of 80. Prior to this formal appointment, the Bible narrates 4 brief episodes from his earlier life, each of which underscores his moral character and deep sense of justice. In the second of these episodes, Moses goes out to witness the suffering of his brethren, and upon seeing an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, he intervenes by striking down the oppressor. The next day, observing a Hebrew attacking another Hebrew man, Moses again steps in to stop the violence. In a third episode, after fleeing to Midian, Moses encounters a group of shepherdesses being harassed at a well by aggressive men. Once again, he acts decisively to defend the vulnerable and restore fairness. Only after demonstrations of justice and moral courage, God reveals himself to Moses and appoints him as one who will lead the Israelites out of Egypt. These early stories thus establish the ethical foundation upon which Moses' leadership is built. What is the purpose of these narratives, beyond simply breaking the silence that had surrounded Moses for the first 80 years of his life? Ahad Ha'am offers a compelling interpretation. Each episode reveals Moses' firm inclination to the side of the oppressed. When Moses witnesses an Egyptian striking a Hebrew slave, he instinctively intervenes to rescue the Israelite, one of his own people, from his oppressor. On the following day, observing two Hebrews fighting, once again refuses to remain passive. Despite the potential consequences, he acts to protect the party he perceives to be victim, even though, in this case, his intervention forces him to flee into exile. Upon arriving to Midian, Moses comes to a well where he sees a group of men using their physical power to push past a group of women seeking to water their flocks. This event bears no personal relevance to Moses. He has no connection to either side. Given the suffering he has already endured for his previous efforts to defend the vulnerable, one might expect him to remain uninvolved, to act with caution or self-preservation. Yet Moses once again steps forward, even in a foreign land, even in an incident that appears minor. Moses refuses to tolerate injustice. What emerges is not simply a portrait of a man who supports the weak. It is the image of a person whose moral compass compels him to act consistently, instinctively, and personal cost. These stories are not included for their historical significance, but rather for the insight they provide into the inner world of Israel's first leader. They reveal the reason Moses was chosen, his profound, innate sense of justice, a principle embedded in the very core of his being. But these stories also respond to a deeper question. How could Moses emerge as a redeemer of a nation enslaved when he himself had never experienced the yoke of slavery? He had not shared in the collective suffering that shaped the Israelites' national identity in Egypt. Unlike his brethren, Moses had grown up in Pharaoh's palace, distant from their oppression. The answer, I believe, lies precisely in these formative narratives in which the Bible reveals something essential about Moses' character. A leader who champions his people simply because he shares their faith may indeed be a good or excellent leader, but not necessarily a great one. The ideal leader is the one who stands with his people even when he has nothing to gain, whose commitment is born not of circumstance, but of moral conviction. Moses, a prince of Egypt, had everything to lose and nothing to gain from challenging Pharaoh's regime. Yet he chose to forego privilege, safety, and status because of his soul burned with deep and abiding sense of justice. His solidarity with the oppressed was not born or shared experience, but of principled empathy with his people. In this, Moses becomes the paradigm of ideal leadership, one who acts for not for personal benefit, but from a profound sense of moral obligation. His greatness lies precisely in the fact that he chose to stand with his people, not because he was one of them, but because it was the right thing to do. We have explored two national narratives that illuminate the early formation of Israel people, the story of Abraham pleading with God on behalf of Sodom, and the story of Moses before his divine appointment as a redeemer. In both accounts, a common thread emerges. Abraham and Moses are each driven by profound, internalized sense of justice, an unwavering commitment to rectifying the world around them. They do not merely recognize injustice, they confront it. Abraham argues boldly with God, challenging the very idea of divine punishment without judgment. Moses intervenes time and again, even at a great personal risk, refusing to remain silent in the face of violence or corruption. In the case of Moses, this moral resolve is taken to its highest expression. He is willing to sacrifice his status, his comfort, and ultimately himself in service of justice and his people. Together, these stories reveal the ethical DNA of Israel's earliest leaders, a passionate devotion to righteousness, rooted not in self-interest, but in the courageous pursuit of a more just world. The principle of justice and righteousness stands as a fundamental value, one that underlines God's choice of Abraham as a forefather and the Israelite nation, and likewise informs the divine selection of Moses, the leader who shaped and formed the nation into a people. We saw this clearly in the story of Abraham. The theme continues to resonate throughout the biblical narrative. Indeed, the value of justice appears repeatedly as a defining attribute of God's engagement with the world. Consider the words of Psalm 96, verse 13. לפני אדוני קיווה לשפוט הארץ, ישפוט תבל בצדק ועמים באמונתו. This verse captures the heart of biblical vision, a God who does not rule arbitrarily, but one who enters history to uphold righteousness and truth. Justice is not only a human aspiration, it is a divine imperative. In the course of biblical history, leaders are chosen according to their readings, to the readiness to put into practice the principle of justice. So is written about David in 2 Samuel 8, verse 15. וימלוך דוד על כל ישראל, ויהי דוד עושה משפט וצדקה לכל עמו. Similarly, Solomon, of all his wisdom, was tested to see if he acted justly, and only after he conducts a trial justly do people accept his leadership. And this principle that determines the fitness of the role of king. In Kings 1, chapter 3, verse 28, we read, וישמעו כל ישראל את המשפט אשר שפט המלך, ויראו מפני המלך כי ראו את חוכמת אלוהים בקרבו לעשות משפט. ויהי המלך שלמה מלך על כל ישראל. Indeed, every single individual must act justly, as Ezekiel says in chapter 18, if a man is righteous and does what is lawful and right. This principle comes into play, for instance, in the prohibition against taking interest on a loan or directive to feed the hungry, and many other cases that we do not have time to explore here. According to Isaiah, Jerusalem was destroyed by the prophets on the account of the absence of justice amongst them. איכה הייתה לזונה קריה נאמנה מלאתי משפט צדק ילין בה ואתה מרצחים. And in chapter 5, verse 7, he says, ויקב למשפט והנה מספח לצדקה והנה צעקה. The future salvation of the people depends on justice. According to Isaiah, who writes in chapter 56, verse 1, כה אמר אדוני שמרו משפט ועשו צדקה, כי קרובה ישועתי לבוא וצדקתי להיגלות. And it is also written in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 27, ציון במשפט תיפדה ושביה בצדקה. I will wrap all this up with a few sentences from a sermon of Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik in Yeshiva University before Pesach in 1969. The following is my paraphrase from his words I read in Hebrew. Jewish mysticism identifies two fundamental divine movements involved in the creation of the world. Chesed, loving kindness, and Gevurah, strength or judgment. Chesed is a movement that flows outward from the self. It surges forward, racing towards the unknown, toward unseen landscapes and horizons, veiled in the mists of the dawn. Chesed resembles the Hasidic concept of hitpashtut, that is, expansion, a dynamic of growth, revelation, and openness. A person is called to surge forward, to expand their domain, to reach out toward a profound existential awareness, to strive to encompass both the you and the I together. One must embrace the entire world, feel a sense of unity with their fellow human beings, live in communion with others, and offer them support. I thank you all for your attention, and Michael, professor of yours, please.
Thank you, Professor Assis, for this outstanding lecture. Food for thought just before Shabbat, and two fundamental values of tzedakah or mishpat will accompany us everywhere. I think it is universal on the one point, but from the other point, it is a Jewish value. And it is also, we are very pleased that you have wrapped up with the Rabbi Soloveitchik, which is the rabbi of Jordan Cherek, our donor. We thank you very much for coming here, for joining us, even though it is Thursday night. We also thank all the people at Missouri and especially the Jordan Cherek family. Thank you very much, and Shabbat Shalom.